Welcome to Star Watch Now, your front row seat to all the hottest gossip, drama, and breaking news from the world of entertainment. If it's trending, shocking, or star-studded, we're covering it. Stay tuned. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Imagine this, a glittering premiere night in Beijing. Cameras flashing, fans screaming, the mood electric. Wang Yibo steps on stage in a relaxed green jumpsuit, fresh from filming Exploring New Frontiers 2, a documentary built on extreme sports and raw bravery. He's sharing a humble story about rock climbing. The fear, the adrenaline, the discipline it takes to stay calm on a vertical wall with nothing but air beneath you. Then, suddenly, his boss Du Hua walks up to the stage holding a sunflower. Not invited, not expected, but unmistakably present. She takes the microphone and begins with warmth. How she's watched him grow since he was 13. How he's family. The room softens, but then her tone shifts into something older, heavier. The kind of caution that doesn't sound like a suggestion, but a command wrapped in love. Don't do such dangerous things. I'm worried. The host smiles and turns to Yibo. Yibo, how do you respond to President Du's concern? Everyone expects the classic idol answer. Polite, grateful, obedient. But Yibo lifts his eyes, half a smile forming, and says quietly, "If you're worried, I can take you to experience it once." For a second, the air freezes. Then the room erupts in laughter and applause. Because that line wasn't rude. It was a boundary. And boundaries, when spoken gently but firmly, can feel revolutionary. What made this moment land so sharply wasn't volume or confrontation. It was the opposite. A quiet line delivered with calm certainty. In a world where young celebrities are expected to smile, nod, and accept authority politely, Wang Yibo's response felt like a sudden breath of fresh air. Viewers didn't just hear a comeback. They heard someone refusing to shrink himself to fit an old script. That's a rare thing to witness in public, especially in an industry built on careful phrasing. The emotional impact also came from how recognizable the dynamic was. Many people have stood in front of a teacher, a manager, a parent, or an older relative who insists they are only worried, and sometimes they are. But worry can easily turn into control, especially when it's wrapped in the language of love and hierarchy. So when Yibo responded without hostility yet still drew a boundary, it felt like he was speaking for anyone who has ever been loved in a way that left no room to breathe. The line carried a subtle message. I respect your concern, but I am not a child you can steer. That's why the room laughed and applauded. Not because it was a joke, but because it was truth spoken lightly. It allowed the audience to release their own tension through laughter, the way people do when something hits home. Underneath the humor was relief, admiration, and a faint ache of recognition. In one sentence, the story stopped being about celebrity etiquette and became about adulthood, selfhood, and the courage to say, gently but clearly, "This is my life to live." Even without saying it aloud, the context around that stage exchange was humming in the air. Viewers didn't watch it in isolation. They watched it against a backdrop of recent contract chatter, industry whispers, and the fragile politics of celebrity management. When there have been rumors, however unconfirmed, about renewals, departures, or shifting alliances, every public gesture becomes symbolic. A boss stepping on stage with a flower and a family speech does not read as neutral. It reads as a signal. That is not to say the affection is necessarily false. Their shared history is long, and people know it. But in entertainment, timing matters almost as much as sincerity. The public had just been watching the story of a star who has outgrown the trainee role, who has built a personal identity strong enough to stand without borrowed scaffolding. So Du Hua's sudden, emotional framing naturally triggered two parallel readings. The tender reading and the strategic one. One said, "She truly cares." The other said, "She's reminding everyone who raised him and why he should stay." The intensity of audience reaction came from this tension. It's the same tension many workplaces carry, where warmth and power sit in the same chair. When leaders speak the language of family, it can be love. It can also be a subtle claim of ownership. People feel that instinctively, even if they don't articulate it in words. That's why the moment sparked debate rather than simple applause. It wasn't only about whether Yibo was cheeky. It was about what the cheekiness meant in a climate where everyone is quietly asking, who holds the future here, the company or the artist himself? The silence before the laughter was the audience sensing that bigger question. At its core, this scene was a clash between two ways of seeing life. Du Hua's concern came from a philosophy many recognize. The elder knows best, safety is virtue, and risk should be reduced wherever possible. It's a worldview shaped by responsibility and fear of loss, especially in an industry where one injury can delay productions, derail careers, and create headlines no one wants. From that angle, her warning sounds like love. Protect the person you helped raise, keep them from harm, keep the machine running smoothly. Wang Yibo's response emerged from a different philosophy entirely. He was raised in a home that, by the transcript's own framing, allowed choice and encouraged endurance. If this is what you want, then commit to it and accept the consequences. That kind of upbringing produces adults who experience restriction as mistrust. For them, being told don't do that is not merely advice. It implies doubt in their judgment. So when Yibo replied, he wasn't simply teasing his boss. He was expressing the logic of someone who believes understanding comes from participation, not command. If you want to worry about my path, walk it with me first. This isn't a battle of good versus bad. It's a collision of generational instincts. One side clings to protection as care. The other sees freedom as respect. Both are trying to preserve something valuable. One preserves safety, the other preserves selfhood. The reason the moment felt electric is that the collision happened without shouting. It happened in a single, polished exchange that revealed a deeper truth. The industry is changing because the people inside it are changing. Artists today are less willing to be parented by their managers. They are asking to be treated as collaborators, not dependents. The line on that stage was the sound of that shift becoming visible, and that visibility is always emotionally charged. To understand why that one-liner felt so decisive, you have to understand the kind of life Yibo has chosen to live. This wasn't a sudden burst of bravado. It fit the pattern of someone who has consistently leaned towards difficulty, not because he is reckless, but because he is curious about his own limits. When he took up professional motor racing, many thought it was a dangerous detour for an idol. He answered by training properly, licensing properly, and competing seriously. When he climbed, skied, and filmed extreme sports, he did so in the same spirit. Not to flirt with danger, but to meet himself more fully. That makes his response on stage emotionally coherent. People who avoid risk tend to interpret risk as immaturity. People who train for risk interpret it as discipline. Yibo belongs to the second group. In interviews and career decisions, he's often been framed as someone who doesn't chase comfort or easy applause. Even after becoming hugely popular, he's reportedly picked roles that demand physical and emotional transformation, and he's put in heavy preparation for them. That's the mentality of a craftsman, not a passenger. When someone like that hears "don't do dangerous things," he doesn't hear love first. He hears a question about his capability. So his line carried more than humor. It carried self-definition. It said, "I know what I'm doing. I'm prepared. I've chosen this." Viewers who admire him felt pride because they saw the adult version of the trainee story. The boy who once endured the hardest training now trusts his own discipline more than anyone else's fear. Even viewers who are not fans can feel the integrity in that arc. It's emotionally satisfying to watch someone grow into authority over their own life. The sentence was short, but it stood on years of proof. One of the quieter truths beneath this story is how modern audiences read Care. We're living in a time where people want affection that honors their agency. The old model, "I worry, therefore I decide for you," is increasingly uncomfortable to younger generations. They don't reject love. They reject love used as a steering wheel. That's why so many viewers didn't simply laugh. They felt something sharper, almost like a tiny vindication. Yibo's line became a symbolic defense of personal space. Another unspoken angle is the emotional cost of being someone else's pillar. The transcript mentions how significant Yibo's commercial value has become for his company. When a person's work begins to carry an entire structure, a team, a brand, sometimes even a stock narrative, concern is never purely personal. It's also institutional. That doesn't make it fake, but it makes it complicated. The audience sensed that complication. They sensed that the stakes in Du Hua's worry were not just about a human body climbing rocks. They were about the future of a business ecosystem. There's also a deeper, softer reading. Yibo's response may have been a way to keep the relationship intact while still pushing back. He didn't humiliate, he invited. That is emotional maturity. He chose a line that allowed laughter rather than conflict, which in turn allowed Du Hua a graceful exit. People often miss how careful that is. Setting boundaries isn't only about firmness. It's about the manner of firmness. His phrasing suggested, "I hear you, but I will not be held still." That's the kind of boundary people trust, because it doesn't come from bitterness. It comes from clarity, and clarity is magnetic. Instead of letting this moment remain just a trending clip, fans could turn it into a gentle, collective practice of growth. A powerful way to do that is to build a community campaign around the theme the line raised. Understanding through shared experience. Call it something like, "Walk with me once." The idea is simple and uplifting. Invite viewers to share a personal goal they were once discouraged from pursuing, and the responsible steps they took to pursue it anyway. This doesn't need to be grand or risky. It could be learning a craft, changing a study path, starting a small business, returning to fitness, traveling independently, or even just choosing a hobby that brought them alive. The key is the emotional pivot. I was told not to, but I prepared, I learned, and I did it safely. That mirrors Yibo's philosophy, not defiance, but deliberate courage. Your channel could encourage participants to post short stories or photos with a consistent tagline, and then highlight a few each week. This changes the energy from gossip to empowerment. It also respects YouTube safety and advertiser standards because the emphasis is on responsibility, not recklessness. Challenging yourself becomes a healthy narrative rather than dangerous imitation. What's beautiful about this approach is that it allows fans to connect with the story in a lived way. It turns admiration into action. The audience stops being passive consumers of celebrity conflict and becomes active storytellers of their own resilience. In that sense, the clip becomes what good pop culture should be, a spark that helps people name their own lives. Yibo's sentence then lives on not as a punchline, but as an invitation to grow, together, not alone. After the laughter fades, what remains is a clear shift in identity. Wang Yibo is being framed not just as a star, but as a figure stepping into self-governance. The transcript positions him at a threshold. No longer the young trainee whose future depends entirely on company protection, but a mature artist with enough experience, discipline, and public weight to shape his own direction. Whether or not he stays under the same management structure, the psychological transition is already visible. He is speaking like someone who owns his choices. For Du Hua and for the industry, this moment is a quiet lesson about changing roles. Managers who once acted as guardians now have to act as partners. The old model worked when artists were children and companies were the only gatekeepers. But in a new era, with global audiences and personal studios, artists hold more leverage and more responsibility. Care that ignores that reality risks sounding like control, even when it isn't intended that way. The bigger story, then, isn't a feud. It's evolution. It's the entertainment world learning that loyalty cannot be demanded by emotional rhetoric. It has to be earned through respect, transparency, and genuine collaboration. And for audiences, this moment reinforces something they already believe in their own lives. Adulthood is not a rejection of your elders. It's a recalibration of the relationship. You can stay grateful without staying small. That's why this clip won't disappear quickly. It's a small stage moment with a large cultural echo. People will keep returning to it because it embodies a question they are all living through. How do you love someone without limiting them? How do you protect without controlling? In watching Yibo answer lightly yet firmly, the audience sees one possible answer, and that answer feels both modern and quietly brave.